One little piggy went to the market, but the other piggy stayed home because he's a clever little bugger, and he totally loves this show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Paleocrat Diaries. I'm your host, Jeremiah Bannister, the one and only Paleocrat. Boy, I've had an amazing weekend. I had a little bit of time off here. I mean, I've been away from the microphone for a brief minute. Hasn't been too long. Speaking of a brief minute, take the time right now to go check out paleocratdiaries.com. Become a subscriber. It's totally free. Full-blown membership only costs $5. And look, we're working on perks for this whole membership deal, right? We've got an app. Wix actually provides an app, so that's one thing that's there. Another thing that we've been looking into is creating a store. That way we could sell Paleocrat Diary stuff, we could sell Team Tiny Dancer stuff, and we've got a lot of really great ideas, but it takes time because you got to put together graphics, you got to have logos and mottos, and one of the difficulties is finding pictures where the resolution and file size work out just right, because when you take a lot of pictures with your phone, it's just simply not big enough. And so it ends up looking really stupid on a shirt. It's like the size of a quarter. It's totally terrible. Nobody would like a shirt like that. I've been putting a lot of thought into kind of a special idea that I think I have, and I'll throw this out there like a little weather balloon, all right? So if you like it, you like it. If you don't, whatever. But one of the ideas I had was to create a zine. Okay, maybe you're too young to know what a zine is, or maybe you're too old and you forgot. But a zine is this kind of mini magazine. And not to reveal my hand too much here, right? I don't want to put all the cards on the table, but I'll say this. It would be nice. And it's kind of a long-term vision and project of mine to be an editor of a magazine or even a newspaper based on Paleocrat Diaries and the topics that we discuss from the angle that we take in dealing with these issues. But in the meantime, you've got to start where you are. You know, you got to deal with what you got. You know, dance with who you brought. And so, as it stands right now, a zine may be a really good idea. And it would allow us to showcase original art, right? Reading lists, poetry, even articles written by hand. I thought that might be especially cool. I mean, hey, look, not going to lie, I've got pretty good handwriting, okay? Both in print and in cursive. It's an art form, and I'm an artist, so I take a lot of pride in that, put a lot of time and effort into making it look nice and pretty. But I thought that might be a really cool idea, especially because this is Paleocrat Diaries. I thought, hey, why not? And there's a good reason for why we're doing this, and why we're doing not just these things, but also, of course, the stuff on our members and service page, like speeches and presentations, whether it's at your college or whether it's at a church or an organization. And the reason for that is simple. Every single penny that I make from this program is dedicated 100% to my kids' education. It's not cheap. They go to a private school. They go to Sacred Heart Academy. It's a classical education Catholic school. Totally dope. You can see their website online as well if you'd like to learn more. I strongly encourage that, in fact. But the point is, for my third grader, my fifth grader, and my seventh grader, it comes to a grand total of $5,000. And it's for that reason that we appreciate not only the members, not only the subscribers, but every single follower, every single person who likes and comments and shares on a status update or a tweet. So even if you can't pay, that's perfectly fine. Whatever you can do, and as I said, even the likes, even the comments, even the shares, all of that, we are eternally grateful for every single bit of it. And no matter what, guess what? I'm going to be doing this. That's just what's going to happen. And I'm going to keep doing my best because I believe that God is going to bless this. Not just because I'm sending my kids to private school. And I think that's a big deal. I think it's a big deal to send your kids to a Catholic school, especially one that teaches classical education. But I have to believe that God is going to bless this program and bless my family because I'm using the gifts and talents that He gave me to the very best of my ability, and that I'm accepting whatever the results may be, that I'm trying to say, look, rather than just getting down, rather than looking at the number of counts and say, man, I wish I had bigger numbers, and to envy other people, instead to say, how can I learn? What can I do better? How can I push harder? How can I make sure that I'm doing the very best I can? not just with the product itself, but with my heart and with my mind. And that's my commitment, not just to myself, not just to my wife or my children, but to every single one of you, every single person who's chosen to take the time to tune in, to listen, to reach out to us, to show us their love and their support. It means more to me than you'll ever know. All righty, moving on. And thank you for allowing me the time. I know I said it was going to be a brief minute. It took like 4. It took longer than I anticipated, but it's important to get that out there, and I don't do that very often. And so I'm really grateful that you afforded me the time, that you granted me an indulgence to talk about not only the website and not only the work here, but also for how much we appreciate all the things that you do for this program and for my family. It means the world to us. All right, now, moving on with the show. As I was getting ready for the show, I'm overlooking all the different topics that I've got on this crazy corkboard here, and it's kind of looking a little bit like John Nash from Beautiful Mind, all over the place. I got to get tacks and string and make it look all conspiratorial, but I'm going through, and I'm thinking, what do I want to talk about? There's so many different topics that I want to touch upon. So I was thinking, what about events, right? Events that have taken place in the last week or so. I had an interview with Timothy Flanders from themeaningofcatholic.com. And we talked about a whole bunch of cool stuff. My upbringing, revivalism, Calvinism, the wild world of sedevacantism, even my reasons for no longer focusing so much on theology and apologetics. At least not so much anyway. I still talk about it, but it's not the primary focus. And that's a big change in my career, right, in the many years that I've been doing this. But I figured I've already done that. I could just tell you, which I already did, and you should go check it out. It's available, in fact, not only on his YouTube channel, but I made sure to add it to the Paleocrat Diaries playlist on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Paleocrat, so people can already go there, right? I thought about maybe talking things related to that. I got really excellent messages. In fact, I'm really excited about the messages that I've been receiving on Facebook and email and even Twitter now. A guy named Brandon posted something awesome talking about the interview, and he said it made him smirk, and it made him laugh, and it made him cry. And yes, it was really that good. And it meant a lot to me, okay? But I thought, I really don't want to talk about that either, right? Not a great detail. Some people wanted me to talk about my views regarding charismatic Catholicism, and I do want to talk about that, but I want to wait for my discussion on revivalism, and that's down the road a little bit. And it's going to focus on a chapter or 2 chapters from the book entitled Enthusiasm by Ronald Knox. And that's going to be kind of its own series. I'm going to have a whole bunch of different episodes dedicated to different chapters of that particular book. It's a really important one in my life. I thought about talking about my experiences. I had a crazy week. In fact, I went to the showing of Screenagers. It was put on by the Diocese of Grand Rapids. It was a great event. I give the movie a B, and that's not a bad grade. That's a good grade. I don't think I'm being rude about that. A lot of it, look, I liked it. There were some things that I didn't like, and I knew most of the stuff in the film. There was very little new information, right, that I was completely unaware of. But this is what I do. Okay, I talk about the digital age and growing up in it and what it does to the brain and things like that, what it's done to our society as a whole. But there were also things, to be honest, within the film that I found to be disturbing. But again, I want to talk about that in another video. I want to be able to dedicate a little bit more time to putting my thoughts together for all of that. I may actually try to get somebody from the film to do an interview for the show. We'll see. I can't promise that. I may even reach out to some of the people who were involved in a panel discussion afterward. I think they did a great job. I had some questions afterward, and we talked for a little bit, and it was really fun. But I want to save that for a time where maybe I can even have somebody come in and I can talk to them about these thoughts. And maybe it's something I don't understand. I'm open to the idea that even the things that disturb me, that maybe I wouldn't find them as disturbing if I had a better understanding of what they were talking about. Speaking of movies, I even thought about talking about Joker. In fact, I read a really great article by a guy named Matthew O'Neill. He's a friend of mine, an unbeliever, and yet we have a lot in common. We have our disagreements too, obviously. But he wrote this really great piece, and it wasn't a review of the film, which if I was going to do a review of the film, I would want to go see it first. And I haven't seen the movie yet. I plan on it, maybe even this weekend. But he wrote this really excellent piece about the dangers of a culture that glorifies villains. And it resonated with me because I've liked shows in the past like Sopranos, like 24, like The Shield. These were shows that at different periods in my life that I really liked them. And I liked that they humanized the villain. I liked that it wasn't just a caricature of a bad guy and that the good guy was what we got to see. I've always liked that. And yet I understand what he's saying too. And so that's another topic that I'd like to talk about. But again, I would like to be able to have Matthew O'Neill maybe on the show to talk about that with me. So I was really getting frustrated over this. I had so many topics to talk about, and yet I had so many reasons not to talk about them right now. So I was frustrated, flustered out of my mind with this. I came into my office. I cranked up the old pink on-air light that we've got, letting the family know that Papa's about to go on air. I even went so far as to turn on the infuser that we have. We got these Young Living essential oils, and I've got this concoction made specially for occasions like this to set the atmosphere and the feel in the room and everything. And I even set it to the color blue, so it's calming, so I could just think it through and think, what do I want to talk about? And then it hit me. And I knew what I had to talk about. And I had to talk about it because I wanted to talk about it last week. And I completely forgot about it because I had all these awesome things happening and it just kind of slipped my mind. And it's important. It's something that I don't only believe that it's important because we're in an election season, but also because, it kind of plays into one of our show's many secret agendas. We've got them. But it has to do with a response that someone had to my wearing a Trump 2020 hat in one of the thumbnails to a video that I made. Honestly, I care about this person. In fact, I consider this individual a friend. I met her. It's a woman. I met her through the Women's Resource Center at Olivet College. That's my alma mater. And she must have watched one of my videos, or at least seen the thumbnail, because she was kind of bothered a little bit by the fact that I was wearing a Trump 2020 hat. And I didn't want to respond to her in the comment section because it was a little bit of a pile-on. It wasn't bad, but there was a little bit of a reaction, and I didn't want to fuel that, so I reached out to her privately, and she was genuinely curious about something. And it's a fair thing for her to say. She was curious as to how someone who she believes to be an intelligent and well-read person, how that individual could possibly support someone like President Trump. I get this all the time. Seriously, every single time I have conversations like this is the reaction that I get. So I've been around this block a bunch of times. But I got to admit something here. It's a disclaimer. And that's that I actually understand that argument. In fact, in maybe a different time, a different place, I would agree with it. But I don't think that it's unreasonable for people to bring this up, to say, look, you're a smart guy. I know you. You're well-read. I listen to your show. We've had face-to-face conversations about really deep topics. How in the world do you support President Trump? This is especially common now because we live in this really polarized political culture. Everybody's comfortable in their little bubbles. Everybody's getting their ears tickled 24/7 by the kind of nonsense coming out of these partisan information silos. Liberals listen to certain radio shows and they watch certain television programs and go and check out certain newspapers or magazines or websites. And the exact same thing is true of conservatives. And all of it is fueling their confirmation biases. Oh, yes, the world's just like I thought. I knew it. Everybody agrees with me, except for the dummies. It's unreal, but it solidifies this idea, this misunderstanding of others, that if someone disagrees with you on a matter like this, of central importance maybe to your scheme, that if they disagree with you, that it's outrageous, that it's unreasonable, that it's illogical, that it's immoral. In some cases, that it's just downright evil. And so whenever there's a situation where somebody is confronted by an outlier, right, what they perceive to be an outlier, I try really hard to assure them that it's not as much of an outlier as they may believe. And in fact, it's far more common than they may even know. A lot of this has to do also with just the temperament, the character of Donald Trump. And she even brought this up. She said, look, I understand the stuff about policies and all that, but his character, who he is, how he behaves. And again, I actually understand this. In a different day and age, I might even agree with this and echo what she's saying, because traditionally speaking, there's been a kind of dignity, with the office of the presidency, a kind of demeanor that we expect of the person who's going to reside in the Oval Office. And Donald Trump definitely does not fit that mold, okay? He just doesn't. And I think that people being honest about it should say, yes, this is true, and here is why I make an exception. I think, though, that to be brutally honest about this, okay, to just face the facts, it would cause Donald Trump, in a weird way, to stand out more on a chart. If you had a poster of all the presidents that have ever existed, and you said, we're going to just focus on character, he would stand out in a way that Barack Obama stands out for being a black president. But it is a dramatic departure from what we've come to expect. And I think that in order to have a fruitful discussion about this, we need to explain that. And why would it be that so many people in the United States came to accept that, to wink at it, in some cases to cheer it on? It demands an explanation. And I think there's no better place to begin this than in the beginning and to say, where did Donald Trump come from? And more importantly, where on God's green earth did the deplorables come from? We live in a day and age of the ascendancy of the deplorables, and a lot of people have been confused by this. It's kind of like, man, there's almost this idea that so many Americans just flipped a switch all of a sudden. They had an excuse all of a sudden to just let out their inner demons. And that's just ahistorical. That's not real. But most individuals don't know who the deplorables are. They don't know much about them, and there's a reason for this. And that actually goes in to why they like Donald Trump and why they voted for him. And so as I'm thinking this through and saying, how do I describe and talk about and give the background and history of the rise of these deplorables, and who are they and what are they about? What do they want? Where did they come from? I'm looking in my library and I said, I know where I've got to go. I've got to go down this really controversial road, though, to get there, because I have to talk about an author by the name of Samuel Francis. Samuel Francis used to be a columnist and an editor at the Washington Times. And this is kind of interesting, but all of that came to an end after a certain man by the name of Dinesh D'Souza wrote in the Washington Post describing a very controversial speech that Francis delivered at the 1995 American Renaissance Conference. And so after that time, right, he was canned from the Washington Times. His work could still be found, is a little bit more difficult, not so mainstream. You could find him in places like Chronicles Magazine or VDare or Occidental Quarterly. And he wrote some books, including Shots Fired, Sam Francis on America's Culture War, which, by the way, is super controversial. He has another book entitled Revolution from the Middle and another called Leviathan and Its Enemies. But today, I want to focus on a selection entitled Message from Mars, The Social Politics of the New Right. And it's taken from his 1994 book that's entitled Beautiful Losers, Essays on the Future of American Conservatism. So he talks about this group, the New Right. And I got to say this first before we move on. Message from Mars, we're not talking the planet. It's capital M, capital A, capital R, lowercase s. It's middle American radicals. And he categorizes them under the banner of the New Right. And he says, in the first place, many of the themes of this New Right, these Mars, what we now call deplorables, so many of its themes and values and interests have been expounded to one degree or another by the old right of the 1950s and 60s. In the second place, the New Right is perhaps best known for its populism and its heated contempt for elitism and limousine liberals. It's true. You got to remember, he's writing this back in 1994. And yet he's describing something that has been the topic of a lot of discussion, talking about right-wing populism. What is it? What is it about? And I think it's easy for everybody to get lost thinking about World War II, which I think is a ridiculous canard. I think it's a terrible red herring. And I'm hoping that through this you'll see that too. But he said, even as early as 1981, that he foresaw that, unlike the old right, the New Right actually had a national constituency. And more than that, that they had a clear possibility of political victory. Among the many reasons for this was the fact that it was, and continues to be, much more than a mere political ideology or electoral coalition. Rather, It's the political expression of a profound social movement that reflects the dynamics of American society and promises to dominate not only politically, but also perhaps socially and culturally. We talk a lot here, not just about, winning an election. In fact, that's way down on my list. And that's a very deplorable thing for me to say, because it's my belief and the belief of a significant number of people within the deplorables that what matters most would be social issues and cultural issues and religious issues, and that from that soil will arise a good politic. Francis says that this is evident from its curious absence from key cultural and political institutions. And look, this is totally true. Think about that for a second. Think back. You don't have to really go even any further than this. If you go back and you look and you say, all right, when Trump was running for office, how many people in high-level positions, right, within established orders and institutions, how many of those high-level people, those wonks, how many of them liked Donald Trump? Even better, we have to go back to the debate that took place. I don't know if it was at an airport or I forget what it is. I don't want to be mistaken on this. But there was a specific debate where Donald Trump was booed big time by people. And he pointed out, and he was telling the people in the audience that were watching on television that the people booing him were lobbyists because it cost a significant amount of money, enormous amounts, in order to get in there. These were limousine classical liberals, and he was pointing this out, letting the audience know, look, that class of people, they do not like me. These people are predominantly Northeastern, city slickers. Okay, they're people that you'll see in academia, the kind of stuff that you would find in William Buckley Jr.'s National Review. But the thing is that the deplorables, they don't have a lot of that. You're not going to find a whole bunch of think tanks. I mean, what is there, American Greatness? They don't have a lot of magazines. I mean, you've got, I mentioned earlier, Chronicles. And previously, anyway, you had the American Conservative magazine. It's kind of gone off the rails a little bit. At least it's departed a great deal from the heyday of the time when Patrick Buchanan was running the show. And apart from Mike Cernovich's Deplorable, the Mars people, they lack the kind of ritz and pizzazz that establishment conservatives have grown accustomed to. I actually learned a pretty valuable lesson about this when I worked as the chief aide to John Tomke. He was the head of New Jersey League of American Families. And he used to be involved with bigger right-to-life groups, even at a national level. But he began to realize something. He told me this. We talked about it one time in the state capitol in New Jersey. We're sitting down eating some food, and he's telling me the history of his work and why he left these big institutions, because he was a Mars person. And the reason why he left was because he said that was kind of a class of people and that they had values that were different from their constituents. More than that, they were more interested in the politics of it all. They enjoyed the fancy soirees. They enjoyed being invited to the pageants and the ballrooms and everything else. They enjoyed that. They enjoyed being on TV. They enjoyed the money. But all of this reveals something. When you don't see a group of people represented in newspapers, they're not represented in think tanks, they're not represented in academia or radio or any mass media outfit, when they're not represented in that way, and they're not represented by representatives, then it's easy then to recognize why we don't recognize these individuals. They're way outside the Overton window, this kind of range of acceptable ideas, because they espouse views that are deemed impermissible. And they're deemed impermissible not just by people on the left, but also people who are classically liberal. This makes it hard to know who in the world they are and where they came from or what they want. And it's also, of course, one of the reasons why otherwise well-intended people are really confused whenever they meet somebody who is educated and well-read and highly accomplished and supports President Trump. So here's a little bit of a history. What is all of this made of, right? These middle American radicals. What is it made of? According to Francis, the contents of its message are perceived injustices, unrelieved exploitation by anonymous powers that be, a threat to the future, and an insult to the past. Think through that for a second. This is actually packed with meaning here, and think about it. Regardless of your position on, any of these individual things, think of the fact that in each and every one of these, that's where the battle lines are drawn. They're sandwiched, so to speak. It's a phrase that was used by different media theorists, but the idea is simply this, that the injustices to the middle-class workers who've been sandwiched, so to speak, between the interests of the elites and the demand of the proletariat. This alliance of elite and underclass against the middle class has been noted by New Right theorist Robert Whitaker in his book, A Plague on Both of Your Houses. You can see this play itself out in modern debates, in fact, concerning outsourcing, offshoring, unionism, college admission, even immigration. And all of these, not so coincidentally, just so happen to be hallmarks of the deplorables. It's a threatened future, insofar as they've been subject to the disdain of social engineers. These people who hold nothing but contempt for deplorables, nothing but contempt for what they believe and how they choose to live their lives. He says that it's an insult to the past as they see American heroes and traditions being maligned, discarded by conservatives and liberals alike. And look, I talk about this in my video Scorched Earth. But we see this with the way that white and conservative and Christian and heterosexual males are treated. We see this with the attacks on American heroes like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, the attacks even on Christopher Columbus. It plays itself out in Hollywood. Consider the recent Trump meme. There was a meme that went around. And it's based on Kingsman, The Secret Service. It's a movie. It's this dark comedy. It's by Colin Firth. And what it does is it portrays this scene of extreme violence against rural Christian people. And we're not talking about a little bit of violence. I mean, this was a wild scene where this guy's going around and he's slaughtering everybody inside of this church. A church jam-packed with these redneck, hickerbilly Christian white folk. And look, maybe there were articles put out by Washington Post and New York Times and Newsweek. Maybe they all covered that. Maybe I missed it. If you've got a link, share it with me. But it's safe to say that it wasn't trending. You didn't see this shared all over the place, not like it was when this Trump-loving meme magician decided to impose pictures of NPR and CNN and Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Strzok and Page, and all of these never-Trumper goons overtop the faces of the people in the congregation. It was only then that all of a sudden people were outraged and aghast. Now it's bad. Think back to most any movie that involves traditional Christians. Just think about this. How often are they portrayed as old-fashioned, backwoods redneck hickerbillies? It's a curious thing. In fact, it's convenient. Conveniently hypocritical. So it's understandable that the new right, according to Francis, has less use for the rhetorical trope and the extended syllogism than for the mass rally and the truth squad, and that some of its adherents sometimes fantasize that the cartridge box is a not unsatisfactory substitute for the ballot box. Unsurprising. And there it is, the mass rally. We're talking 1994. People, I got in a conversation not long ago where a guy was bringing up the rallies and saying that it kind of is reminiscent of the Hitler era. And I say, you're missing the point of this. You're missing the point of why he does that or why he relies on Twitter. It's the same thing. It's the same reason. Because the views that he espouses, the views, beliefs, and values that he represents for people who are among the deplorables, they don't have representation in big media. They don't have representation in big tech. In fact, those individuals are antagonistic toward it. They loathe it. And they play the role of gatekeepers. This has been going on for my entire lifetime, well before I was born. These beliefs, these values, this way of life is well outside the Overton window of the Hollywood, D.C., and New York City complex. So he doesn't go through them. Why would he? They're not going to give him a fair shake. They haven't. Just think back for a moment. And people who have this Wayback Machine called the internet, they can go and they can see that there was research published by the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy According to the Washington Examiner, the Harvard scholars analyzed the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and the main newscasts, these don't include talk shows, of CBS, CNN, Fox, and NBC during Trump's initial time in office. And you know what they found? They found that negative news dominated. In fact, it was 80% negative amongst those outlets that were studied. You had 20% positive, and per the numbers, if you compare them to previous presidents, Barack Obama was at 41% negative, 59% positive. You got George W. Bush, 57% negative, 43% positive. Bill Clinton, 60% negative, 40% positive. It's not even close. And it sure as heck hasn't ended. You have a more up-to-date article here over at the Washington Times, published in 2018, a study done by the Media Research Center. And they conclude the coverage of the White House on the big three broadcast networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, remains 91% negative. It's astounding. More than that, this trend is unprecedented. So why would he go through those gatekeepers? Why would his supporters even want him to? They don't. They prefer him, as sloppy as it is, as wild and crazy as it can be, and all the little spelling errors and everything else that he does. They prefer to have direct and immediate, unadulterated access. And they get that. They get it on Twitter. They get it with these chopper pressers that he does. They get it with YouTube, with the White House channel, where they put out all of these interviews that he does, which, by the way, there's a ton of those. He's highly accessible. And they get it especially with rallies. And in that way, they feed off of each other, because they are able to express to him immediately their feelings. No gatekeepers. They mock the gatekeepers because they're there. They're in the back, and they still have their audiences, but their audiences are not the deplorables. They never have been. And when they are, it's only reluctantly, because they know in their heart of hearts that even the people who may side with them, take Sean Hannity. He's a great example. Right now, a lot of people would say, well, Sean Hannity is an example. Yes, but you know what? Sean Hannity's the same guy who used to support George W. Bush and that brand of conservatism. That's not Mars. That's not the new right. That's definitely not deplorable. They're all gatekeepers. They choose to say what they want to say. They choose to cover what topics they want to cover. And it always is in line with their values. And their values, as it was evident in 2016, are not the values of the deplorables. In fact, they are completely opposite of this. The media hate their freaking guts, which I must say happens to make it especially hilarious whenever the media boo-hoos over deplorables, calling them fake news. Every time Trump decries the media at these rallies and talks about them as being gatekeepers and fake news, the media gets all in a bunch, assuring themselves that they've just been objective journalists. They don't have a vendetta against any specific group. Nobody's been conveniently left well outside the Overton window. Nobody's been maligned, not by them. Of course not. We're fair. We're balanced. We're professional journalists. Saying that kind of thing might help journalists sleep at night, but it's complete nonsense. And the deplorables know it, which is why they refuse any longer to accept their filters and their frames. Their narratives don't cut it anymore. Francis says that the social movement the New Right expresses, and whose values, resentments, aspirations, and fears it tries to articulate, is composed of what sociologist Donald Warren calls Middle American radicals, or MARS, and, in our case, deplorables. In this sense, it's less an objectively identifiable class than a subjectively distinguished temperament. And I think that this is key. I think it's key for understanding why Trump supporters do not count Trump's temperament against him. It's unconventional. There's no doubt about it. And you know what? I don't know anybody who says that it's not, but they see it as a strength and not a liability. It also explains why deplorables spend so much of their time criticizing lobbyists and limousine liberals and college professors and illegal immigrants, narcissistic millennials and highfalutin environmentalists that hop on their private jets to fly across the globe in order to lecture people about why they shouldn't eat meat, because of cow farts and plastic straws. And I know that a lot of individuals will chalk this up as a matter of education. They'll say, well, these are uneducated people. And part of me says they're not entirely wrong. In fact, I think that's why Trump rightly described them as undereducated. But to leave it at this would be to miss the point. And this kind of plays into this curious feedback loop for liberal people who've attended college. It's hard for them to imagine these individuals. And part of the reason is because those individuals were not part of the bubble known as academia. They don't see them. And for all the talk of encountering the other and going to the margins and all this stuff, for all that talk, that talk would in fact require them to go face to face with the deplorables instead of with the classmates sitting next to them and thinking that that is a reflection of what the world is, or at least exactly what it ought to be. Deplorables are more commonly known to be Catholic than, for example, Baptists and Mormons. And we saw this play out with the candidacy of Evan McMullin. We also see this, of course, with Mitt Romney. I don't know, the entire state of Utah, for that matter. That was a battleground. Hey, that's where the never-Trumpers thought, if we can get somebody there, if Evan McMullin, that's the guy. If we just get that dude there, it's going to undermine President Trump, and he's not going to reach that threshold of electoral college votes. Give me a break. But that was the plan. And it wasn't for any stupid reason. I mean, they understood this. Most deplorables tend to be in their 30s and 60s, which kind of echoes this generational dynamic that's discussed in a book entitled The Fourth Turning. I don't agree with it entirely. It proposes this cyclical idea of time. I personally believe in an Augustinian linear model of time. But there's increasing evidence, too, that you're seeing the generation that's younger than the millennials, that those individuals are more conservative than any of their generational elders. And deplorables are significantly less likely to be professional or managerial workers. Most of them are going to be skilled or semi-skilled blue-collar workers. But as Francis points out, these are statistical features, and these don't define the deplorables. They don't define the middle American radicals. What does define them is an attitudinal quality, their view of government, their sense of the establishment, and their role or lack of role in it. That they're sandwiched between the rich and the poor. It leads to this feeling of neglect, this feeling that they don't matter. Consider the rise, for example, of people like Lou Dobbs. His books are in this exact vein. They decry the death of the middle class, the loss of labor to foreign markets, the advent of political independence. People who say, I don't identify with any of the major parties. People who said that maybe it's time that we have a third party. But this isn't simply a middle class or economic category. But as Francis rightly states, it's a revolt against the dominant patterns and structures of American society. And this, by the way, is the swamp. This is what people mean by that. The dominant patterns and structures of American society. It's the swamp. In fact, we could add to that the research done by Timothy Carney. He wrote something entitled Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. And it's part of his claim that one of the reasons for Trump's ascendance was fueled by this rising distrust, not only in these what are known as traditionally intermediary institutions, but also a distrust in religion and religious authorities, that they don't even believe that they are adequately represented by them. And you know what? I was part of that. I was an atheist who supported Donald Trump. So these people aspire then, not only to become this dominant political class, but they desire to do so, as Francis states, by displacing the current elite. They want to dismantle its apparatus of power, and by discrediting its political ideology. Can you see this? Can you see this? Open your eyes. Think about meme warfare. Well, that guy in his basement, he doesn't have any power, influence, and sway, and he's making these memes. We better go find him. Just think for a second how crazy it was that CNN tracked down That young man who made the meme of Donald Trump body slamming somebody with the CNN logo imposed over their face. It was a clip from WWE. They searched him out. They found out who he was. They found out the history of different things that he posted. And they went so far as to threaten to dox him, to reveal the information about his life, where he lives, what his name is. And they even put that in there. We reserve the right to dox this person unless he recants and deletes his stuff. It was outrageous. But that's the kind of warfare that you see. And that's a power dynamic that people should not gloss over. But you're seeing this liberating and rebellious spirit amongst the deplorables through the memes that they share, through talk radio. You got Breitbart, Tucker Carlson, Milo Yiannopoulos, PewDiePie, Donald Trump. And again, here we can see the root of the new right's toleration and even celebration of Trump's temperament. What the establishment refers to as bluster, brutishness, or braggadocio, the deplorables recognize as brilliant and brave. But what does it mean then to be an elite? And maybe more important than that, how in the world doesn't Trump fit the bill of that? The guy's a billionaire. Huge amounts of money. He flies around on a super fancy jet with gold seatbelts and stuff. And he's been thoroughly entrenched in the cultural elite for most of his life. But it's not as simple as that. Because we have to ask, what is the ruling class actually made of? Francis quotes Italian political scientist Gaetano Mosca, and I'm hoping that I'm not just completely destroying the guy's name, right? Gaetano Mosca. And he wrote this. He said, quote, ruling classes do not justify their power exclusively by de facto possession of it, but try to find a moral and legal basis for it, representing it as the logical and necessary consequence of doctrines and beliefs that are generally recognized and accepted. It's got a political formula, and what it is liberalism. And this liberalism doesn't merely include leftism, right, as is popularly portrayed by a lot of right-wing pundits, but it includes classical liberalism, which, by the way, is the belief system and the worldview that is embraced by the vast majority of those pundits that decry the liberals on the left. Look at how this plays out even amongst people who decry their opponents as liberals and call themselves conservatives. Francis says that it's here that they made common cause with corporations. He's talking about liberals. That they made common cause with corporations, labor unions, universities, foundations, and the media, more often than not at the expense of smaller or local regional units. This plays itself out in a whole bunch of ways. Think of it this way. Reconstructionist education, revisionist history, critical theory, psychobabble, postmodernist relativism. That, by the way, is uncomfortably tethered to this activist-oriented dogma contained within ideas like intersectionality or gender and ethnic studies. It's always elitist and top-down, all these influence campaigns. You can see this with Hollywood, with New York City, with D.C., the nexus of these things, all together. And consider how people, the middle American radicals or the deplorables, consider again how they're portrayed, as opposed to the people who are more modern and up-to-date in their ideas and their etiquette. It's a matter of artifacts over against inevitabilities. We see it in foreign affairs. We're seeing a fusionism because it's the uniparty. It's a comfortable thing. It's not a major break, but it's more than this. It's the cosmopolitan ethic. There's this kind of contempt for Edmund Burke's little platoons, these small towns and families and neighborhoods, traditional class identities and relationships, authoritative and disciplinary institutions. Francis names a bunch: the police, the military, parental authority, the traditional disciplines of churches and schools. If we use Jonathan Haidt's language of moral foundations, we'd say that these individuals in the elite, that they lack an emphasis on hierarchical authority and tradition. Hence, the glorification of the self. We see this play out in social media, branding, commercialism, the gender wars, radical forms of solipsistic individualism. That's deplorable to the deplorables, because they recognize in that there is an overlapping interest with politicians, corporate heads, even religious leaders. And we can see this right now, evidenced in the borderline schism that is currently unfolding between the Vatican and traditional Mars-oriented Catholic people. And that's the crux of this. Because if you really boil it down, this is a difference between the old and the new guards, between the old elite and the new. And this is the power dynamic, okay? Mars used to enjoy the role of an older, more localized and personal elite. In this sense, politics was close to home. But Francis is right to say this, that the globalizing effect of mass communication and massive corporations led by liberal elites gave way to a new elite. And it depended on schooling and managerial sciences like social science, public administration, modern business management, and not so much on things like inheritance or experience or the virtues that are commonly ascribed to the Protestant work ethic. Worse yet, these new elites were able to portray the old elites as parochial, nativistic, isolationistic, and downright backward. They're hillbilly rednecks, dinosaurs of an age fading fast. It's true. All of those phrases, I've heard every single one of them. They've all been directed to me. Every single one. And that's why these individuals feel this way. He goes on. Their values of work, thrift, discipline, sacrifice, and postponement of gratification are deemed outmoded, absolutist, puritanical, superstitious, and even hypocritical. And this paved way for an activist, even missionary-styled global elite that were situated in political structures revolving around international and regional blocs, new markets and trade agreements, and new international institutions, and for international relations and conflicts that are congruent with the interests of the elite in government, industry, finance, education, and labor. All of it's true. And it's against these elites, not just any elites, that the Mars social base operates, because it is that. It is exactly that which they wish to overthrow. And that's what this is. That's what this is. We've come all the way around. This is the end, folks. It's the changing of the guard. It's the old elite saying they want this back. That the new elite and their values and their system, their worldview, their structures, their power and fame, all that money, that it's not inevitable, that these programs are not inevitable, that these mega shifts in culture and religion are not inevitable. But these individuals, these deplorables, are not strictly concerned with politics. And as Francis says, they must go beyond the tactics of electoral coalitions and roll call votes if they hope to develop a strategy for the seizure of real social power, because it extends to the levers by which human societies are controlled, to the media of communication, the means of production, and the instruments of force. So what do they have to do? Before Donald Trump, what were they to do? Sit back and suck it up. That's what they were supposed to do. Sit back and suck it up, you redneck hillbilly, backwoods weirdo, uneducated dummy, white heterosexual Christian male. Shut your mouth. This is the future. If you don't accept it, that's okay, because one day you'll die, and the world is ours. They weren't having it anymore, because they've been beautiful losers the whole time. They've been losing and losing and losing because they were beholden to even a conservative political class that, due to its belief in its worldview of liberalism, was just completely entrenched, enchanted by the elite. They were one and the same. It's kind of like the progressives are driving over a cliff into the pits of hell at 90 miles an hour, but conservatives every once in a while are pumping the brakes. They don't plan to turn around because they have the same philosophy of progress. So they're not going to turn around, But every once in a while, hey, we got to pump those brakes. You know, maybe we shouldn't drive exactly so fast. We'll go to that cliff at 85. You know, we'll enjoy the ride. Do a little Sunday stroll into the pits of hell. And that's what a lot of these deplorables are seeing. They said, look at the changes that have been done to our history. Look at the way that our heroes are maligned. Look at the way that our religion has been bashed day in and day out on television, on radio, in the newspaper, in the schools. And what do the conservative leaders do? They fight for a minute, but once they've lost, that becomes what they're conserving now. Because to do anything other than that would be to embrace a philosophy that says, oh, no. We're actually going to go back. We're going to turn back a clock. But that to turn that clock back, that goes against the grain of the philosophy of progress that is embraced by conservative pundits, those in power. Because if they didn't believe that, if they didn't say, well, I pumped the brake, but I'm still going toward the edge of that cliff with you, buddy. If they didn't keep reassuring the person way ahead of them, number one, eventually there's going to be a huge divide, which that's been thrust upon us now with the rise of the deplorables, with the descent of Donald Trump on that escalator. But it would not only force that confrontation, maybe most importantly, it would affect their pocketbooks. It would affect their prestige. They wouldn't be invited to those balls anymore. No more pageants, no more dances, no more soirees, no more fancy dinners, no more spots on TV. You'd be one of the members of the alternative media group. You'd be in meme country, folks. Depersoned. Not just deplatformed, depersoned. Deprived, in many cases, of your ability to make a living. And you know what? It's hard to deal with that. It takes people of principle, and not just a philosophy of progress, but a real principle, to say, no, I'm not going that way. I'm going to take a hit. It takes somebody like my old boss. I don't even know if he's still alive. I haven't talked to him in a long time. He was old, and he was poor, and he was powerful. He made huge changes, highly respectable, and feared by the political class, but didn't have a penny in his pocket. Drove a junker car, but he drove that bugger everywhere because he was a deplorable. So people ask, what then should you do? What next? You know, what's the game plan? In short, is there a future for Trumpism after Trump? That's a huge question, and we'll talk about that next time. Maybe not the exact next one, but that's going to have to wait down the road. I've already got some stuff lined up for that. In fact, I'll probably still rely on another chapter from the book by Samuel Francis, because I think that just as he was unrivaled in his understanding of the group known as Middle American Radicals and who we know as deplorables, but he also understood, because of who they are and because of what they're against and because of where they want to go, he had a very keen idea as to what they needed to do. And so we'll talk about that next time. Look, I'm glad you joined us, everybody. And if you're one of those long-form warriors that doesn't mind podcasts this long on one topic, I applaud you. In fact, I give you a Scooby snack right here across the microphone. So eat it up, enjoy it while it lasts. But, you know, the thing is this, and I need to say this before we go, is that whenever I do a podcast like this, okay, anything like tolerance, multiculturalism, diversity, cultural stereotypes, masculinity, scorched earth stuff when tolerance goes too far, any of these controversial videos that I've done, and I do them pretty regularly, right? It's becoming a bad habit of mine. But whenever I do that, the idea is, A, not to stir up controversy. I'm not sitting here doing clickbait. Long-form journalism like this and long-form discussions of this nature, this is not clickbait stuff. This is swimming in the deep. And so I'm not sitting here just trying to ruffle people's feathers and, you know, gaslight people. And I don't even have the idea within my mind. It's not even within the realm of possibility for me that I sit there and say, oh, well, I anticipate that people are going to hear this and all of a sudden become hardcore Trump supporters. Even the woman that I had the back and forth with that inspired this conversation, I don't anticipate that if she listened to this entire thing, and I don't even think she probably did, but if she did, I would think it's very bizarre if all of a sudden she called me and she's wearing a MAGA hat and has a Trump 2020 flag behind her and she bought a cardboard cutout for her bedroom. I'm not absurd. I'm not unrealistic about this. That's not my goal. My goal instead is to demonstrate not only that there's good reasons and that educated, well-spoken individuals, accomplished people can explain this, but even more that those reasons are the same reasons that people have who may not be educated, who may not be as eloquent, who may not have access to a microphone and a podcast and an audience like I do. Those people exist. We know this, but it's time that we know them. Because not only then will we have a better understanding of our neighbor, we'll have a better understanding of our president. And if we have a better understanding of our president, then maybe we can get past certain things that are incidental, things that are inconvenient or unconventional, and get down to the matters that are underlying this entire debate, that are underlying every single battle line that we have in our culture. Because it's only then that dialogue begins. It's only then that civility returns to public discourse. It's only then that enemies retain their humanity. And it's only then, as friends and not enemies, as fellow citizens and not deplorables, that we can truly, together, make America great.